Welcome to Dramatic Pause, a Rose Theater podcast. On today's episode, we'll be sitting down with Matt Gutschick, the artistic director for The Rose, and talking about the upcoming shows for the 2021 season. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just get started here with Matt Gutschick, who is the artistic director here at The Rose. And Matt, how long have you been doing that job here?
It has been 7 years, so I'm in first grade.
Okay, yeah, so it's been a crazy first grade year then, because there's been so many changes coming up. Do you want to kind of talk to us about what a normal process for picking a season might look like, and then kind of what changed this year?
Yeah, and we are trying to evolve this process so that it includes more of our staff and board members and the young people that we serve. But in a typical year, we're always reading scripts and we're always kind of canvassing what other theaters are making and following very closely what the publishing industry is doing in terms of creating new literature for young people. And then there are several staff members, of course, who are teaching kids of all ages all year. And so they're pretty tapped into the books, movies, and other media that kids really enjoy and think might make a really good stage play. So it's always kind of this balance of reading what already exists, trying to ask the lawyers for writers who've created TV shows and movies and that kind of thing, if they're open to having plays made about their work, working with playwrights to try to create those adaptations or sometimes original plays. And then, when that kind of all starts to come together, it's mostly because time starts bearing down on us. And we kind of know that in the fall, we've got to make some decisions about the year that's going to start the following August and September. So generally around November and December, we have to really winnow things down to the things that seem like they would be most available from a legal standpoint, but then also the things that are, if we're creating them ourselves, the plays that are most ready to go and that will speak to younger kids from kindergarten on up, and then to some older kids with a couple of our shows. We really do want to speak to kids 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and even older, of course. But that's something that kind of comes into play where each show in this season is really has a different identity in terms of who it's trying to communicate with. So we usually start off the season with a show that is going to welcome people with younger children into the Rose. And then as the season progresses, there's going to be various points where we're going to try to mix it up with boy or girl or non-binary protagonists, with musicals and non-musicals and that kind of thing. And normally we would have two, generally they're really, really big cast, big orchestra musicals, one in the winter and then one in the summer. And so some of those plans had to be adjusted once we realized that this upcoming school year, and in fact, this upcoming season would need to be a little bit different. So, most of the time we're just trying to figure out what are the things that are going to speak to kids right now. And right around November, December, we start making some final decisions about that.
Sure. And so, normally we have a 7-show season, the 2 premium events, like you talked about, the big musicals, and then usually 2 shows that happen in our Hitchcock, part of our first stage series.
Right.
And that when we're looking at something very different this year, we're looking at 4 member shows and then 1 big musical. And so how did you decide what shows we're gonna get in this year? Was there things with the cast size or with audience, or was it still trying to keep a mix but just pared down? What were kind of your biggest factors?
Yeah, you kind of named several of them. The first most important thing was making sure that if the situation with the pandemic didn't evolve very quickly in a positive way, that we would still have the option to produce some shows. And so that meant thinking about things that could be done with social distancing, which I think is going to be kind of cool to see on stage, how much people even notice that the actors are going to be, particularly with our first show, at least 6 feet apart at all times. It's a fun artistic challenge for the choreographer to think about how we can dance when we're that far apart, with no spins or turns that are, partner based, that kind of thing. So that was really the first consideration, which also did by default mean that we had to think about some shows that wouldn't have enormous casts so that the actors would have some freedom of movement on stage. So generally, the things that we're producing have around 6 to 10 actors this season. And beyond that, we were trying to keep it to things that would be where we would be allowed to send videos to the public. People might not know this, but when we do a show that is licensed or contracted, meaning another theater has developed it, and maybe there's a company that allows theaters like us and schools to produce that show, there's a family of rights that are secured, which is really just to put the show on stage. And it's a very different set of legal rights if you're going to broadcast a show to an audience. So one of the things that we focused on very heavily when we had to redo this season was keeping things that would allow us to take high quality video shoots of them, edit those together, and still broadcast them to folks that might not be comfortable coming physically to the Rose. And, God forbid there should be any disruptions to our ability to actually have live performances. But if that happens, then people are still able to enjoy the shows from home. We're hoping to approach something similar to, though maybe not quite at the level of what folks have been experiencing with Hamilton on Disney+. So we're going to have a 3-camera shoot done of each show that then is going to be edited together with, a mix of close-ups and wide shots and that kind of thing. So that was the second concern that came into play. And then beyond that, we wanted to make sure that we were still speaking to the various age groups, of course, without alienating anybody. So none of our shows would really be too old for a younger kid, but we're hoping that things like It's a Wonderful Life and How to Build an Ark, Searching for Joel Sartori would be really engaging to a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade child.
Sure. That's awesome. So then now we're starting with Penguin Problems, which is based on a book, right?
Yeah, it's based on a book by Jory John, who adults might know wrote a really fun book called All My Friends Are Dead. It's a book for adults, but it's kind of a picture book for adults, and it's about a dinosaur who survives the Great Extinction. So that was kind of popular on a lot of people's coffee tables maybe 6-7 years ago. And then he wrote a really, really fun book about a penguin that is just sick of living in Antarctica, is just sort of tired of being stuck there in the cold and all the rest of it, which we think has some resonances to the way that people might be feeling right now, where many people can't say that they were able to finish the school year the way that they wanted. Summer was probably different than a lot of people envisioned. And so it's a comedy about how we navigate circumstances that might on the surface seem kind of limited, but are still really full of people that we love and family and that kind of thing.
That's awesome. And this is going to be a musical, right? The first show of the year?
Yeah, the first show of the year is going to be a musical. We're doing it with a live band, a small 4-piece band. And it was actually, the music and the lyrics were written by someone who teaches in our Broadway at the Rose program, Trudy Yates. She's a brilliant music writer. And she's got a really fun way of doing these songs for Penguin Problems. They're kind of like bluesy songs, you would say. So it kind of fits the theme of the material, but they're really fun. They've got a lot of swing to them. And there's a couple good tap numbers in there, which will be hilarious to see penguins tap dancing, we hope. So
that's awesome. Yeah, we're super excited to see this show. Of course, Matt hasn't said anything about bragging on himself here, but he's also one of the co-writers of the show. And then Miss Trudy did the music, and we're hoping to have them both on again to talk specifically about that show and their process, which is super exciting. And then the director of this show is a local, right?
Yeah. So this is a person that we have worked with on a couple of occasions as a performer, and she's directed at a couple of different places in town. And we're really, really excited to have her on board. Folks that maybe have seen some shows at the Union for Contemporary Art would have recognized her work. She directed a show last season. So.
Yeah, yep, and we're gonna have her on right before the show opens, actually. So they'll have had some rehearsal time, and we'll kind of get the director's view of what it's been like rehearsing with social distancing and working through those kinds of things, and still making some amazing art, some amazing magic. So we're looking forward to having her on too. But then following that show's going to run for 6 weeks. So the very next show is actually going to be what would be our holiday show, We're moving right into It's a Wonderful Life. And that's a little different than what people might naturally expect, right? It's a smaller cast than maybe you would think.
Yeah, it'll be really fun because the way that we're telling this story is as an ensemble show. So it'll feel really, really cool to see all these actors playing all these different roles. So right now, and it's a brand new play. It was it was an adaptation that was made based on a radio play version of It's a Wonderful Life. And so Sarah is the writer and the director, and she had this concept that we're hoping is going to be really, really fun and cool, where a couple of actors will play all these different roles. And there's going to be a couple of actors that will also just stay in the same role the entire time. And two of those most important characters are Joseph and Clarence, the two angels that watch most of Bailey's life take place before Clarence goes down from heaven, if you will, to help him. And so it's going to be fun to see a child youth actor play that role. And of course, right now the plan is to have George Bailey played by an adult. So to see that juxtaposition, I think will be a really insightful way to view the material. And I think it's going to, for anybody who loves this movie, watching it as a family and all the rest of it, it keeps all the high points of the film, but it does reduce the runtime down to like 60 to 70 minutes, we're thinking right now. So it'll move really, really quickly, and it'll be very, very accessible for kids that, you know, if they happen to watch the movie and get a little fidgety, this is actually tailored to a slightly younger child to really have a good time watching.
Sure. And this one will be a straight play, not a musical, right?
Well, there's going to be some live music in it. We're going to have a couple of musicians on stage, and we're using music from the era for the most part. It's from the 1940s, so it'll be kind of riffs on maybe some well-known hymns and Christmas carols, and then some secular music as well.
Very cool. Okay, awesome. And that show also runs for 6 weeks. It'll be kind of right around Thanksgiving all the way through just before the Christmas holiday. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of take our big break. The Rose takes a little bit of a break right between kind of Christmas and New Year's, and then we start rehearsing the next show, which I am super excited about. How to Build an Ark: The Search for Joel Sator. And so, can you tell us a little bit about kind of how that show came to be and what we're looking at with that one?
Yeah, so there's this incredible writer who's Omaha-based. Her name is Ellen Struve, and we had wanted to commission her to write a play for the Rose for a number of years. And she and I kind of went through a couple of different pieces of material that maybe would be fun to adapt. We try every couple years to do a show that is about our regional identity as people living in the metro. And so a very recent example of that is Return to Niobrara, which is in many ways a very local story, even though it had an incredible national impact historically. And so this is an idea that Ellen had after watching Joel give a couple of speeches. And for folks that might not be familiar with Joel, he is one of the most popular photographers on Earth. He works frequently with National Geographic. That's who publishes most of his work. But he has embarked on a project to take a photograph of all the species that are in captivity, with paying particular attention to those that are endangered. So the idea with him going around to all these zoos and wildlife refuges across the world is that he wants to humanize the animals. He wants to make us understand the fact that our fate as a species on this earth is bound up with the creature that's looking back through the camera at us. Now he does this, but he's also incredibly funny. So some of the images you're going to see, you know, the backs of some rhinoceros tushes, you know, it's kind of whimsical stuff too. And so Ellen took some of the coolest photographs, but also in some cases, the silliness of the photographs that he took. And she's created living, breathing characters based on those photographs. So this show is going to feature projections and a really, really talented cast, again, with some actors that are playing multiple roles. And folks are going to meet grizzly bears, sea turtles. They're going to meet naked mole rats, which we weren't able to have our audience meet this spring. And so the fun thing about this show is that it follows a young girl. So we are going to be hoping to do some age-appropriate casting another youth actor as the lead in that show. And she goes on this journey basically inside of an issue of National Geographic. And that's where she meets all these animals. Her mom sends her on a quest to find the most interesting species, which is, of course, a really, really difficult question to answer. And at the end, she learns a really important lesson about not only the survival of species that might be endangered, but also about how all of us as individuals are vital to the health of our planet and to the well-being of our fellow inhabitants on this earth.
Very cool. Yes, I've heard some of the production people talking about how excited they are for the projections and how beautiful these photographs are. If you haven't looked up some of that photography, you definitely should, because it's whimsical, it's fun, but it's also really telling about all these different animals. So
I didn't mention one of the most important parts, which is that Joel is from Ralston. So he still lives in Nebraska, makes his home in Nebraska, has a family here. And that's one of the major reasons why we wanted to focus on him, is that here's somebody who's having a truly global impact as an activist and a conservationist and an artist. And he's our neighbor.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think a lot of times when we think about Nebraska impact, Nebraska history, we're always thinking about things more like Return to Niobrara, things that are more historical, but it's super cool to have someone who's doing work right now and having this show come out. Yeah, so that's awesome. That's kind of our beginning of 2021 show. And then right before we, have our big summer musical, right, is going to be our final member show of the year, Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. And if you want to tell us a little bit about that show and kind of what we're excited for there.
So that show is an adaptation of a couple of the Pigeon books. If anybody's familiar with that series, it's written by Mo Willems, who is also famously the author of the Elephant and Piggy series and a couple of other really important characters in some children's lives. But this particular character is a really ambitious, rambunctious and silly pigeon who, when he sees the city bus come by, he is instantly in love and wants to drive that thing. And unfortunately, because he's a pigeon, he's not allowed to drive the bus. But he does, through the story, find the really individual way that he can contribute to his community. And so it's a really fun, funny, and pretty heartwarming story. That's a musical. It's one that has a ton of really fun songs. Folks most recently would have heard this person's work in Ella Enchanted. Deborah Wicks-LaPuma wrote the music, and Mo Willems, the guy who wrote the picture books, actually wrote the script to this piece as well. So we're really excited to have that on our stage. We've done a couple of Mo Willems pieces in recent seasons. And so this is kind of one of his most famous books. So we're really excited to see this one adapted on stage.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah,
it's
Elephant and Piggy.
Puppetry.
Oh, done with puppetry.
Mm-hmm. So Stephanie Jacobson, who folks might remember her directing work from pieces like Curious George. And then she's also a fabulous teacher on our staff and one of the best actors. And so she was recently in our version of Winnie the Pooh. She played Piglet. So those are just a couple of the things that Rose members might be familiar with. But she's the director of this, and she spends a lot of time working on various kinds of puppetry. And at an earlier point in her career, she worked with the Muppet Workshop in New York City. And so she got a lot of training there. She was recently sent to this really cool National Puppetry Festival that takes place on the East Coast at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center. So she met a bunch of new collaborators there. And one of those is a person that's going to be doing the puppet design and the puppet build for this show.
That's awesome. That's so exciting. How cool. Yeah, so it sounds like, we've got an incredible lineup for members. And if you caught the podcast before this, we talked with Mandy, who works in membership. And if she didn't convince you that membership is a great deal, you didn't listen to that podcast close enough. So go back, watch it again, join as a member, come to one show, and you have already made back your money compared to single tickets. And you get all 4 of those awesome shows that Matt and I have been talking about. But then also you get discounts to our summer musical, which we're talking about Descendants in June of 2021. And some people might be familiar with the movie, some might not. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about how close it might be to the movie versus, what's kind of different for the stage and what we should be excited for?
Yeah, so the songs are drawn from the movies, actually. So they're going to be very familiar with, they're going to be very familiar to audiences. So the concept with this show is that the Isle of the Lost is where the children of the evil characters from some of those traditional Disney movies. So think like Maleficent and Jafar and Cruella de Vil. So this imagines a world where those individuals went on, had kids, and by virtue of their evil parents, the parents and the kids have been sort of banished to this other island. But then you have the children of the Disney heroes, characters like Belle and Cinderella and that kind of thing. And so the parents, the evil parents, hatch this plan to try to break into the world of the Disney protagonists, but they try to use their children to do it. And the kids, no surprise, once they meet each other, learn that their differences aren't as great as their similarities, and they become friends and sort of have these really dynamic, funny relationships with each other that develop over the course of that show. And of course, then at the end, they've got to stop the evil plot together. So it's really a story about a community coming together, bridging differences, and it will put on stage some of our favorite characters from Disney films. So while there are new characters that some people who are familiar with the classic Disney movies might be meeting, you do have Maleficent, Jafar, Cruella de Vil. All those characters are also going to be fully portrayed on stage. So we think that this is going to be a riot for audiences to experience next summer.
Yeah, very fun show for sure. If you haven't seen Descendants, you should. I watched the movie as soon as I found out we were doing the show, and yeah, and it's really fun. So we're super excited to have it be part of our season this year. And then I just want a really quick touch for anyone who's curious, who's out there listening and is wondering, are we done with auditions? Do we have more auditions coming? If you're interested in trying to be a part of any of these shows, what's their next steps?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for folks that are adults and youth artists under age 18, there are going to be opportunities to be in these shows that we mentioned. The only one that is cast right now is Penguin Problems, and that's because it goes into rehearsal very, very shortly here. But what folks should do is write an email indicating their interest in learning about future auditions to auditions@rosetheater.org. And if you do that, you'll be added to a distribution list. We only send out emails when there are auditions. We don't use that for any other kind of advertisement or that kind of thing. So that's a list that will get you in the know about future auditions. And at this point, because we are trying to keep everybody safe, we are preparing to do video auditions for the foreseeable future. And, a lot of folks fortunately have the ability to do a pretty high quality self-tape, we call it, right on their cell phone. And we're developing some additional tools. If there's a student artist listening out there who maybe has never done a musical, we're going to try to create some video guides on successfully auditioning for musicals. And additionally, we're going to try to reduce the need to go find somebody to practice on the piano singing a song with. We're going to try to create a kind of like a karaoke track that we can teach people what that song is, and then they can just record themselves performing that piece. So it should be a really, really low impact way for young people to get involved if they're interested. And there will be more auditions in the early fall. So we're looking at doing those auditions for It's a Wonderful Life in late August, early September, because that show needs to go into rehearsals pretty quickly.
Sure. Okay, awesome. Well, we super appreciate your time, and we look forward to hopefully talking to you again with Miss Trudy a little more in depth about Penguin Problems. But we can't wait for this season to start, and thanks so much for hanging out with us for a while.
Yeah, thank you.
See you later.
Bye.